Hello and welcome to part 5 of whatever this is, videos, I suppose. Let's see. There are a few things I wanted to finish up on that I had talked about in the previous parts, but it would help if you'd seen the other parts, but I don't know. So here I go. Also, if you could subscribe, that'd be great. If you are one of those people that would want to, if there are any at all. Okay, so here goes. Regarding OceanNations, I know I belabored the point a little bit, but I just had a few more thoughts about it that I've had in the past, but didn't mention, so I thought I'd just mention them now. One of the things is beaches could actually happen on OceanNations. I know I talked about a rectangular, like a receptacle or something like that, like a tray or I forget exactly the term I used. A receptacle for all intents and purposes. They would hold dirt and soil and buildings and trees and whatever else you may have, the people. But outside the wall, you could have like a beach or something like that, like something man-made, and then on top of that, sand. And if you could go out fairly far, so you could go, you could walk on the beach, and then you could also go into the water. It's just something extra. It may be too cold where that region is. It's fine. Just being on the beach may be nice. Something built on the beach, a city line or something like that might be nice to have. So that's one thing, but beyond the initial wall of this ocean nation, it doesn't have to be a nation. It could be something much smaller, a city, a refugee camp, whatever. But during times of, say, a tsunami or a tidal wave or something like that, there should be walls that can go up on all sides of this structure. And they should be waterproof, of course, and you want them to be fairly high in case the weather does get worse. They say climate change is making things worse. Maybe that's one way it may do that. So quite high walls should the need come to do that, and we could do that. And then if there's flooding, say torrential rains, or the rain gets over the wall, then you have a drainage system, a drainage system possibly better than any other on Earth, or second to none, because you've got the ocean right beneath you, and you can filter it out and drain it back to the ocean where once it came, or it usually comes from there if you're living out on the ocean. But whatever the water is, it could go down into a drainage system, and maybe little holes or something, and drain, or something much larger and drain it off to the ocean, back to the ocean. Okay, so that's enough about OceanNations. I just had a question about this wall that President Trump is building. I understand the need for it. Let me explain my position on it, if you don't mind, or if you will. I think that one of the main problems is the drug trafficking from, say, nations south of us is one of the problems. We don't want that going on if it's illegal. Now, if marijuana were federally legal, then you wouldn't have such a problem. Hopefully, I mean, that's one of the things, is that there are many Americans that do partake in marijuana, and the only way to get it is south of the border, and so they make their way in, or that's how it makes its way in through south of the border. And marijuana, I think, is less harmful, is possibly very beneficial for those that have medical needs. As such, that medical marijuana will alleviate the pain or whatever it is. It seems, I mean, I can't admit I've ever tried it, but because that would be incriminating myself. But I've heard many accounts from people I used to know, and growing up, when I was a teenager, late teens, and then early 20s, things that it would do that would make you mellow, feel cool, or make you sociable. It's something to make you feel good while you do an activity or something like that. So I'm not saying it's the best thing to do when you're at work, though, because operating machinery, probably not a good idea. I don't know all the wheretofores or everything about it. That could be looked into. But driving a car, for example, is probably a bad idea, just because you're focused on the high, and it may affect driving skills somewhat. And so that would be the rub to the whole thing, is you'd have to give up smoking and driving, or eating marijuana and driving. They have edibles now. But I think federal legalization is possible. There is a petition for it. I don't know who's doing it or what, but there is one out there. I tried starting one and it went nowhere, but explained some things. Operating heavy machinery, probably not a good idea. Walking by the roadside, I don't know if that's such a good idea. But if it's done in a safe environment, it may be fine. And then the effects do wear off, and you can go about life as usual. High is another thing that it does. It makes you feel high, meaning the opposite of depressed. Can make you feel quite good, and it's a nice sensation. And then there's intellectual. It could make you possibly have some intellectual thoughts, or thought in general. Thoughts that they can be discussed. Socialization is what I talked about before, but maybe you could have a heady intellectual conversation, and it's not just, it seems intellectual to the person doing marijuana, but it actually is that it is intellectual. And maybe we could reap the benefits from, I've heard that it can inspire great thoughts. So that's something else that we could use in this country. Not that we don't already have that American know-how, people thinking things and coming up with great ideas, great whatever works. But it'd be nice to have marijuana in addition to all the choices there are. I mean, I think marijuana is probably a better choice than alcohol, just generally speaking, health-wise. Maybe you do a little bit of each or something like that to keep from getting, there hasn't been anything that I've heard derogatory about the smoke from marijuana, that it actually hurts you. But that's something we can look into. And if the government approves it, then it doesn't mean we can go willy-nilly and have a whole lot of it. But I mean, some may have more than others, but there are probably limitations. Maybe there's some limits that should be set as to how much and how often and whatnot. Safe levels of THC and stuff like that. Is there such a thing? I mean, is it something that you can do in abundance and then some, and it's still fine? I don't know. I mean, you may want to look into that and see. The government may want to look into that and see about everything about it, and see if it should be federally legalized. I mean, it's legal in some states, and I think there may be a problem if people flock there for just that reason, because then it doesn't look so good. It looks like people are there to just partake in the drug, and that's all that goes on in that state or that area or whatever it is. If it were federally legalized, I think there would be people that didn't, and secondhand smoke is a real thing. You don't want to get someone contact high, give them a contact high, who doesn't want to partake in it or doesn't want to get it that way or at that time or whatever. So there would have to be secondhand smoke laws dividing people, a smoke area. I wonder why they did away with the smoke-free areas. I mean, I guess for health reasons, but I think moderate smoking isn't the worst thing. I was a smoker for a great amount of time, but I gave it up mostly for other things, and I seem to be, legal things, and seem to be doing well without it. A minor thing in my life, but still important to me. I mean, smoking is nice. It's just nice. It can be a social thing or whatever, but I don't recommend it necessarily in an excessive amount, and not for young people because they're not old enough to decide. So there should be some age limit. The price is just ridiculous for a regular cigarette, regular brands, name brands. It's far too high. There are taxes on it, and it's just unfair if you've already decided to have it and you don't make that much money. You are out of luck, to be frank about it. I mean, you can't afford them. Pardon me. But it would be nice if smoking wasn't frowned upon so much. But maybe people should be taught there's a limit to how much you should have and how often. And then there are other things that you can do. If they get vaping right, which I think they have, vapor e-cigarettes. I know that was a disaster at one point, but today it's much better, and I mean, they have to make sure that everything is above board with it, but nicotine alone and something natural or something like that, or a flavoring or whatnot, isn't a bad idea, an alternative to smoking. So and it can be quite pleasurable. I mean, I looked at it at first and I said, who wants to do that? I'm not allergic. Addicted to tobacco is how I saw it, the whole drug tobacco, and I probably am. That's why I have an occasional cigarette or a mini cigar, which is about the size of a cigarette. But I'm working on that, cutting that back. Just recently, I mean, within months, I've made the change, and it seems to be working. My lungs feel much better. I feel healthier. I feel better about myself for not smoking as often and like that. So Things to consider, but smoking area in a restaurant, why not? Marijuana, or it's federally legalized, or for those states that have that, a smoking area, maybe even ventilation systems, a separate ventilation system, or something that just sucks up air in the ceiling, that sucks up all air, whether it be marijuana or smoke or whatever, from a cigarette or even cigars. Maybe there could be something, but all good things in moderation is what I was once told. Not necessarily maybe the things you like better, if they're acceptable, a little bit more or something like that. There's some formula in it, probably different for all, but all good things in moderation makes sense. Eat healthy is a good idea. But there's something to be said for a treat now and again, or a dessert or something. You do have to watch. I had a medication that led me to potentially have higher blood sugar, and so I had to be careful with sugar. And I think people in general have to be careful, but I don't think there should be restrictions where they are going to tax sugar. I mean, that just seems ridiculous. I mean, it should be known, and people are different. I mean, people may want a high blood sugar level, not in the danger zone of getting diabetes. That's something that happens to people later in life, sometimes earlier in life, where they've had high blood sugar enough to become diabetic, and that's not something you can reverse at this point in time. There are alternatives to insulin, but I think so anyway, and it's not pleasurable. I mean, it'd be nice to have a good amount of sweets on occasion. So some things to consider, but punishing people for partaking in sugar now and again or something like that, it just seems unfair. Okay, enough about that. Back to where I started. I made a why in thought, and I'm going to trace back to the wall. Okay. I don't think it's a good idea for the reasons I said about drug trafficking, and there are certain drugs that are just too dangerous, I think, for the average person. If you take too much of it, you're dead. So if there was a way to go to a safe place, have someone administer it that knows about the drug, but then there's always the chance of addiction, and you do it on your own, and so I'm a little skeptical about certain drugs. I've known people that have done lots of different drugs and stuff, but I was the guy that didn't do the drugs. Occasional small amount of alcohol or something like that, but I found out I was a hypocrite because drinking is a drug. So, excuse me. Okay, so where was I? So drinking is also a drug. If you do too much, your blood alcohol level could be high enough so that you could actually die. Or if you drink it often enough, they say it causes cirrhosis of the liver. That may be a fact. You don't want that either. And then if you continue to drink, you're probably not going to get a liver. They're not going to give you one because you're just going to ruin that one too. And there's a waiting list for people needing a new liver, so not good. But should any of these other drugs get through, be federalized? I don't know. I mean, shrooms or something like that, mushrooms I've heard of, and it's mild hallucinations or something like that. I can't talk right now. Sorry. I'm sorry, I can't talk right now. But so mushrooms, are milder than some other hallucinogens and stuff like that. Um, Maybe if it were done in supervision or a safe environment. I don't know. You have to be careful with mushrooms because there are poisonous mushrooms that are deadly. I mean, real deadly. That you just need a small amount and you're dead. So you have to know that it's the right thing and like that. But I was thinking, I once came up with the concept of life betterment centers, and there's a place you could go to learn about living a better life and whatnot. And I dreamt of magazines and something. That was a long time before the internet really kicked in, and there are a lot of things you can look at on the internet now to see what you're interested in, and then maybe pursue that as an interest or as a job or something that an interest that turns into money or something like that. A pastime, learn something about something, clothing, whatever it may be. But so Life Betterment Centers was an idea, sort of like community center type of thing. Something like that is what I had thought of. In each community, something like that to help people find. I mean, people like to find things on their own, but if you could set it up where they're actually, looking, they're researching, they're looking for things, and then some people like to be handed options and pick something from that, or maybe someone knows exactly what would be good for that person somehow, and they don't mind someone telling them what, what to do or how to spend their time, something like that. So, okay, Life Betterment Center, one thing, but I was also thinking of, if you're going to do something like shrooms, say that became federally legal, it's milder than other hallucination drugs, but if you were doing like certain drugs that were legal, maybe you could only do it in a safe environment where you have possibly supervision or at a distance supervision. Like if something goes wrong, you could be in a safe place. Nothing is going to harm you or whatever. I still wonder if that's healthy. Is it good for the person? I don't know. Pardon me. So these are all options, something to be weighed. I mean, marijuana is the only one that's been on the table as far as I know. The ones that are deadly, you have to be real careful with and maybe just say no. As Nancy Reagan, President Reagan's wife, once said, just say no. To some things, you need to just say no. And that's probably what inspired me not to do drugs at an early age. So I have her to thank for that. So that's good. And when you're older, you should be wiser and make better decisions. It's probably not always the case, but it may mean a lot to be older, to make these decisions about cigarettes or vaping or anything like that, drugs. But the government should know what's what about drugs and smoking and whatnot. And are there false ads is a question I had. The president talks about false news. Well, is there false ads about smoking? That it causes things? I mean, was it something else that caused this terrible thing instead of, is it smoking in combination with something else? Is it smoking way too much? So these are questions I have, and maybe we need a discussion, something more about them. I've decided that there are a lot of things that aren't as important to me as I first thought, like smoking isn't that important to me. I can do it in a minor way and be happy with that. I wish it were cheaper, so I could get away from my cigars, cigars. They're not as good, I think, and maybe not as healthy as just a name brand that, if you have it occasionally, and I'd ask, not that they're listening, but cigarette companies not to, fill them with things that are going to wind up killing people. That's not the point of smoking. It's to be a pastime, to improve a situation, maybe something that you're doing, a conversation or something, have something to do with a cigarette, whatever. Okay, back to the wall again. I think that, so if we could tackle the drug problem, and we can grow, if it's federally legalized, our own cash crop of marijuana here, but yet let others in. There's supposed to be marijuana from other places that's better. So that's something to consider, but also growing it here in the States. We could even export if it's above board, meaning a good thing, not a bad thing, and then we may need to set limitations on it or something like that. I don't know. But these are all thoughts I'm having, and maybe a panel of government officials could figure it all out, do the research, but there may not be time to delay. We've got a real serious issue with the border and drugs and people addicted or medically in need of marijuana, and the red tape gets in the way. And that was one of my very first thoughts about legalizing marijuana was medical use is a real thing, and apparently doctors seem to think it helps. It's a big plus, but the red tape gets in the way because it's not federally legalized. But if it were, maybe we do it right, and then if you're afraid of the smoke, there's edibles. I'm not saying we should taunt young people that aren't of age to do marijuana with these candies and whatnot. Maybe on the top shelf there could be something that they can't see or something like that, that's out of their reach. They can't even reach it, something like that, or behind the counter, not seen, not to tempt, something like that. But back to the wall. I just think it sends a bad signal to the rest of the world. Xenophobia comes to mind, or putting up borders so strong that we're not going to let anyone deal with us. I believed in NAFTA. I think it did well. Free trade agreement, North Atlantic Free Trade Agreement, Canada and Mexico and us making free trade good for all three. You could, make it. Free trade is a good idea, and I don't know. If capitalism works, and so throughout the world, maybe there should be more of a capitalistic mindset, where we're not saying, okay, you have to pay us extra money just because you're dealing with us. That doesn't seem to make sense or be fair. I don't know. It seems that capitalism works, and everything else walks. So free trade sounds good to me. Does it work? Maybe there is a fee to send something or import something. I don't know, exports and imports, does it cost more to do so? Yes, sending things and whatnot, but to add a tariff, I don't know. Maybe that should be looked into. Is that a valid thing? But let me hurry up with the wall. I heard double fence works, so why not a double fence and leave it at that? Maybe something that prevents, you know, I mean, at a distance and the right security, and people coming into this country that we don't want. A checkpoint here or there for people that can get into the country, and I've got to go because this is really long. So take care and subscribe if you will, if you want. I'd appreciate it. Thank you and goodbye.